When my son told me I wasn't welcome at his place for Christmas, I didn't argue. I smiled, got in my truck, and made one phone call. By New Year's, their mortgage payments were wiped out. And that was only the first move in my plan. Justice needed to be served, and pride needed to be cut down to size. You wouldn't believe what I did after that. Before we go further, make sure to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment about where you're listening from. I could make my famous turkey this year, I said, leaning back into David's leather couch. The one with the sage stuffing your mother used to love. Remember how she always said it was better than her grandmother's? My words floated in the cozy air, mixing with the scent of Claire's overpriced vanilla-scented candles. David shifted beside me, the gold of his wedding ring, catching the glow from their 12-foot Christmas tree. His shoulders drew in like he was bracing for a hit. "Dad, unfortunately, you won't be welcome here for Christmas." The words landed like a punch to the gut. I blinked, sure I'd heard him wrong. "What do you mean? Why wouldn't I be welcome?" David avoided my eyes, staring instead at the marble coffee table, the same one I'd helped him choose last spring, when Claire decided their old set wasn't elegant enough. "Claire's parents are coming, and they'd prefer if you weren't here." My hands went cold. "They'd prefer?" "It's just easier this way, Dad. You know how her family is with their traditions. They have their own way of doing things." His voice got smaller with each word, like he was folding in on himself. My gaze wandered around the living room, to the silk drapes I'd paid for when Claire complained about the neighbors being able to see into the hardwood floors that came from my second mortgage, to the crown molding that maxed out my credit card. Every inch of this place carried my fingerprints, my sacrifices, my love for my son. "Their own way?" I repeated slowly. "In what way is that, David?" He flinched. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Through the kitchen arch, I spotted Claire's gleaming KitchenAid mixer, the professional-grade one she swore she needed for her holiday baking phase that lasted all of 3 weeks. $2,000 of my money sitting there, probably untouched since October. "Where will I spend Christmas then?" My voice came out softer than I'd intended. David's expression cracked. "Maybe you could, I don't know, visit Aunt Marlene, or we could celebrate the weekend after." The weekend after. Like Christmas was just another date on a calendar that could be shifted around for convenience. I pushed myself up my knees, aching from 8 long years of carrying this burden alone. "I see. Dad, wait." But I was already heading toward the door, past the family portraits, where my face grew smaller and further away, with each passing year past the coat closet crammed with Claire's endless jackets. My hand closed around the doorknob, its metal cool and solid in my palm. "Son," I said without looking back, "tell Claire's parents." I paused. "Feliz Navidad." The December air slapped my face as I stepped outside toward my truck. Behind me, David called my name once, followed by the quiet final click of the door closing. Done. Final. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, engine off, watching the Christmas lights blink in the windows of houses where I'd never be welcome. My phone buzzed, probably David ready to smooth things over with empty promises and guilt. I ignored it. Instead, I turned the key and pulled away, leaving behind the warm glow of the home I'd bought, but would never belong to. The heater hummed against the December chill as I drove through the familiar streets. South Hills stretched around me, every block holding memories of the man I once was, the man who believed family came first, the man who'd give his last dollar just to see his son smile. That man had been a fool. I stopped at the light on 29th and Grand, watching a young father load Christmas gifts into the back of his SUV. His kids pressed their faces to the glass, fogging it with excited breath. Once that had been David in me, before Claire, before I became nothing more than a walking ATM with feelings that only got in the way. As I sat there, the numbers started tumbling through my mind like a busted slot machine. $2,800 every month for 5 straight years. Last spring, when I finally totaled it up, my calculator practically laughed at me before quitting. $140,000. More than Linda and I had ever managed to put aside for retirement. Gone. Just gone. As the light flipped green, I pressed the gas harder than I needed to. The truck growled in response, matching the weight in my chest. Fifth Avenue. That was where I'd refinanced my home, our home Linda's and mine, just so David and Claire could make their down payment. The loan officer had given me a look I didn't recognize back then, pity. "Mr. Carter, are you certain about this? You're taking a big gamble on someone else's investment." Someone else's investment. Not my son's future. Not my family's security. Someone else's investment. Lincoln Drive. The bank where I'd taken out a second mortgage when David lost his job 2 years back. "Just for a little while, Dad. Just until I'm back on my feet." Claire stood behind him, a $700 handbag hanging off her shoulder, nodding along like she cared, but her eyes were already calculating exactly how much my desperation could be milked for. Turns out my desperation was worth nothing to either of them. I pulled into my driveway, the one with the cracked pavement I couldn't afford to repair because every spare dime went toward funding their perfect little suburban dream. The porch light flickered above me, another fix I'd been putting off. Inside, the house felt emptier than it ever had, without Linda's laughter, without the warmth of family gatherings I now knew would never return. My phone rang as I fumbled with my keys, the sound bouncing off the hollow walls. Claire's name lit up the screen, probably ready to give me her carefully polished excuse for why I wasn't good enough to be around her parents. Perfect timing. I'd been waiting 5 years for this talk. I let it ring until the 4th before answering just long enough to make her wonder if I'd bother picking up. "Frank." Claire's voice oozed with that syrupy sweetness she used whenever she wanted me to cover their water bill or property taxes. I heard about the little misunderstanding with David. Misunderstanding. I leaned on the kitchen counter, still wearing my coat. "I don't think there's any misunderstanding, Claire. You made yourself pretty clear. Look, I know it feels harsh, but you have to understand my parents' point of view. They're very traditional people. They expect a certain atmosphere during the holidays, a certain atmosphere," I echoed. "And what atmosphere would that be?" There was a pause, the rustle of shopping bags coming through the line. Probably spending money that should have gone toward their mortgage payment, the one that was somehow my responsibility. "Well, they're not used to your style of cooking. All that spicy food and loud music. And frankly, Frank, they're educated people. They expect conversations about current events, literature, art, you know." The words landed harder than a punch. 8 years of biting my tongue, of swallowing insults for David's sake, of pretending not to notice how she looked at me like I was the hired help. My style of cooking. My voice stayed steady. "You mean the food you ate every Sunday for 3 years when money was tight? The chili you said reminded you of your grandmother. That was different. We were appreciative then. But now with my parents, now with your parents, you can't risk the working-class embarrassment at your polished dinner table." Her fake sweetness vanished. "Don't be dramatic, Frank. This isn't about race. It's about class. My father graduated summa cum laude from Washington State. My mother speaks 4 languages. They summer in the Hamptons. And what exactly would you bring to a dinner conversation, stories about laying tile?" Heat rushed through my chest, but my tone never wavered. "I built a business from the ground up after your husband's grandfather died. I've employed over 50 people. I've paid more in taxes than your father made in his best year. Money isn't everything, Frank. Breeding matters. Education matters. And frankly, Linda knew her place better than you know yours." The line went dead. She'd crossed it, the invisible line I didn't even know existed, until she stomped right over it in her designer heels. "What did you say about my wife?" "I'm just saying she knew how to blend in better. She didn't stir the pot. She knew some places weren't meant for her. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went pale. Linda had more grace in her pinky than your entire family tree will ever have. Oh, please. She was just a cleaning lady who got lucky. At least she had the sense to keep quiet about it. Claire. My voice dropped into something cold and unfamiliar even to me. I want you to listen very carefully. This conversation is over. You can't just, "We're done," I repeated, and ended the call. I placed the phone on the counter with deliberate care, my hands steady in a way that surprised me. The kitchen felt different now, smaller somehow, but lighter, like something heavy had finally lifted. I walked over to the desk in the corner and pulled out the manila folder I'd been avoiding for months. Bank statements, mortgage documents, 5 years of automatic transfers that had bled me dry while they played house like royalty. Time to stop the bleeding. Part 4. The first move, canceling the mortgage. The papers spread across my kitchen table like evidence at a trial. 5 years of statements each showing the same withdrawal, $2, $800 on the 15th vanishing from my account into theirs. A paper trail of my own stupidity. I grabbed my calculator and started punching in numbers. Year 1, $33,600. Year 2, another $33,600. By the third year, I'd stopped buying myself new clothes. Year 4, I'd been grocery shopping at discount chains. Year 5, my lunches were down to peanut butter sandwiches just to keep up. $143,400. That's not even counting the down payment or the times I covered their utility bills when Claire's shopping sprees spiraled out of control. Not counting the new roof, the yard work, the furniture they had to have to match their image. I leaned back, staring at the numbers until they blurred together. Linda's life insurance, my retirement fund, the college savings we once set aside for grandkids I'd probably never meet. All of it gone. All poured into a house where I wasn't even welcome for Christmas dinner. I reached for my phone and scrolled until I found my bank's number. The automated voice offered options in English or Spanish. How nice. How thoughtful for people like me. Customer service. This is Jennifer. How can I help you today? I need to cancel an automatic transfer, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years. Of course, sir. I'll just need your account number and some verification. I read off the numbers while listening to her typing professional quick without a hint of judgment at why a 62-year-old man was cutting off what was probably his son's mortgage payments. I see the transfer, Mr. Carter. $800 monthly to Wells Fargo account, ending in 7423. How long have you been making this payment? 5 years. The words tasted bitter. And you want to cancel it immediately. My eyes drifted to the outdated stove. I couldn't afford to replace the chipped paint on the walls. The drafty windows, reminders of every home repair I'd skipped to keep someone else's castle standing. Effective immediately, I said. Done. The transfer is canceled. Anything else I can help you with? The word felt better than I expected. No, that's all. I ended the call and sat there in the quiet. Outside, December darkness settled over Spokane Christmas lights, glowing in windows where families gathered without judgment or conditions. For the first time in 5 years, next month's budget would finally balance. For the first time since Linda died, I could replace that porch light, buy real groceries, maybe even take a vacation. I gathered the bank statements, the mortgage documents, every scrap of proof of my so-called generosity. Then I walked over to the fireplace, struck a match, and fed 5 years of self-imposed martyrdom to the flames. The warmth on my face felt richer than anything I'd felt in years. My phone buzzed with a text, probably David wanting to smooth things over, or Claire needing cash for something urgent like seasonal throw pillows. I didn't bother checking. Instead, I poured myself a glass from the top-shelf whiskey I'd been saving for a special occasion that never came. Tonight seemed special enough. I lifted the glass toward the empty room, toward Linda's framed photo on the mantel, toward the man I used to be, and the man I was on my way to becoming. "Merry Christmas to me," I said, and I meant it. Part 5. Claire's provocation. Morning came crisp and bright, December sunlight spilling through my kitchen windows as I sipped my second coffee. For the first time in years, I wasn't silently subtracting money I knew would vanish in 3 days. Freedom tasted better than the Colombian roast I'd finally treated myself to. At exactly 10:47 a.m., my phone lit up with Claire's name like a warning label. Frank. Her voice carried that well-practiced impatience. "I need you to pick up my parents from Spokane Airport. Their flight from Portland lands at 2:00. I set my mug down, watching the steam twist upward. "Claire, did you forget about our conversation yesterday? Look, whatever that was about, we need to focus on practical matters right now. My parents need a ride, and you're the only one free during the day." The audacity nearly made me laugh. Less than 24 hours after telling me I wasn't good enough to sit at their Christmas table, she expected me to play chauffeur. "And you're asking me because that's what family does, Frank. They help each other." Her voice sharpened. "Besides, let's be honest, you're not my rival. You're too weak to be my rival. So just get in your truck and go pick them up." There it was, an insult dressed as an order. "What airline?" I asked, quiet and even. "Alaska Air Flight 447. Baggage claim Carousel 3. And Frank, they're expecting someone who can handle their luggage properly. Don't embarrass us." I could hear her nails clicking on something hard, probably that granite countertop I'd paid for when she decided laminate wasn't dinner party worthy. "Of course," I said. "I'll handle everything." "Good. And wear something nice, maybe that blue shirt from David's graduation." They notice things like that. The line went dead. Not even a thank you. I leaned back, staring at the blank phone screen. 2 Husro, Flight 447, Carousel 3. My eyes flicked to the clock above the sink. 10:52 a.m. Plenty of time. I poured another coffee, added an extra spoonful of sugar, and opened yesterday's crossword. 7 across, delayed gratification, 12 letters. The answer would come eventually. Part 6. The Airport Trap. At 2:15 p.m., I was settled into my favorite chair with a fresh Earl Grey and the Spokane Review's Sunday edition. Yesterday's crossword sat completed on the coffee table. Delayed gratification had been postponement. My phone buzzed on the wood beside me. Claire's name again. I let it ring. The December sun streamed through my windows, warming the spot where I'd spent so many lonely evenings, counting the cost of my misplaced loyalty. Today the quiet felt different, earned, deliberate. At 2:47 p.m., the phone buzzed again. This time I caught the start of her text. "Dad, where are you? My parents are." I flipped the phone face down and turned to the sports section. The Seahawks had lost again. Some things never changed. By 3:30, my phone had already lit up 6 times. I'd finished the Spokane Review, brewed a second pot of tea, and started organizing the junk drawer in my kitchen table, a job I'd put off for years. Funny how much you can get done when you're not running around catering to people who think you're their personal valet. The 7th call came at 3:45. This time, it wasn't Claire's name. It was a familiar number I recognized. Probably her parents borrowing someone's phone at the airport. I let that ring out too. Outside, my neighbor was stringing Christmas lights along his porch while his kids tore around the yard with that manic December energy only children can manage. Normal families doing normal things. No one stranded anywhere waiting on someone who was never coming. At 4:15, my phone started ringing without pause. Claire, then the unknown number, then Claire again. The buzzing droned like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. I walked over, pulled my landline plug from the wall, and shut my cell off completely. Silence. Perfect silence. I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich and heated a mug of tomato soup, comfort food I hadn't splurged on in months because every grocery dollar had gone toward keeping their fantasy afloat. The bread crisped to a perfect golden brown. The cheese oozed just right, and the soup sent up a rich, steamy curl from my favorite mug. Outside, the winter light was already fading, stretching long shadows across the yard. Somewhere across town, 3 very irritated people were likely standing in an airport parking garage bickering over taxi fare and wondering how their loyal driver had dared to leave them stranded. That thought made my soup taste even better. By 5 Huzarun, I'd eaten, loaded the dishwasher, and was debating which movie to watch. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had an evening to myself without the looming threat of emergency calls for cash or last-minute favors. I'd just reached for the remote when the pounding started, not knocking. Pounding, the kind that shakes the doorframe and radiates pure fury. I set my tea aside and walked toward the noise, slow and steady. I already knew exactly who was outside. The pounding grew louder with every step, each blow more aggressive than the last. Through the peephole, I saw 3 figures crammed onto my small porch, clustered like wolves closing in on prey. I opened the door to Robert Whitmore's flushed face just inches from mine. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he barked, shoving past me into the living room without so much as a hello. We waited at that damn airport for over 3 hours. Margaret followed, her normally flawless hair frizzed, her lips pressed into a thin, venomous line. "This is completely unacceptable for a man your age, Frank. Absolutely barbaric." Claire trailed behind, her designer coat creased, her makeup smudged. "You humiliated us. Do you have any idea what you've done? My parents had to take a $40 cab because you decided to get out of my house." My voice sliced through their noise like a blade through silk. They froze mid-rant, clearly startled by the steel in my tone. "Excuse me." Robert's face deepened from red to a dangerous purple. "You don't get to throw orders around after what you pulled." "This is my house," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "And I want you out. Now." Margaret stepped forward, her words dripping with the condescension she'd perfected over a lifetime of looking down on people like me. "Frank, you clearly don't understand the magnitude of your mistake. My husband has connections all over this city business. Uncle, you can't treat people like us this way and expect—" "This was a lesson for you," I cut in, locking eyes with her. "A lesson about your arrogance and how you treat people you think are beneath you." Claire's jaw dropped. "A lesson? Who do you think you are to teach anyone anything? You're nobody. I'm someone who finally stopped being your personal ATM and chauffeur." I stepped aside and pulled the door open wider. "The lesson's over. You can leave." Robert jabbed a finger toward my chest, but he didn't quite have the nerve to touch me. "You have no idea who you're messing with, old man. I've been in this town longer than you've been breathing its air. I know people, important people, people who can make your life very, very difficult." "Is that a threat, Mr. Whitmore?" "It's a promise," he said, voice dropping to a low growl. "You think leaving elderly people stranded at an airport is something you can just get away with? You're about to find out how wrong you are." Margaret's lips curved into a razor-sharp smile. "Indeed, actions have consequences, Frank, and yours will be very public." Claire tugged on her father's arm. "Daddy, let's just go. This pathetic old man isn't worth our time." They shuffled out like a retreating army. But Robert paused in the doorway. "You'll regret this," he said. "I guarantee it." I closed the door behind them and turned the deadbolt with a firm, satisfying click. Through the window, I watched them pile into their rental car, still bickering as they pulled away into the December dark. The house felt cleaner without them, as if their presence had left a film on the air that was finally gone. But their parting words stuck in the quiet public consequences, important people connections. I walked back to the living room and picked up my tea, still warm in the mug. For a moment, I felt a flicker of concern, but it was quickly drowned out by something stronger: anticipation. 3 days later, I was sipping my morning coffee and flipping through the Spokane Review when I saw my own face staring back at me from page 3. The headline read, "Spokane Businessman Abandons Elderly Couple at Airport During Holiday Storm." My hands froze around the mug. There I was, in black and white, a 5-year-old headshot from my company's website. Beneath it, an article that made my blood run cold and my temper spike in equal measure. Robert and Margaret Whitmore, visiting their daughter for Christmas, were left stranded at Spokane International Airport for over 4 hours Sunday, when family member Frank Bennett failed to appear for a prearranged pickup. The piece claimed the couple, both in their late 50s, waited in frigid conditions as a winter storm warning was issued. Winter storm warning. It had been 52 degrees and sunny. "We couldn't believe someone would just abandon us like that," Robert was quoted as saying. "We called repeatedly, but Mr. Bennett never answered. We were forced to take an expensive taxi in dangerous weather." At our age, this kind of treatment is not just inconsiderate, it's dangerous. The article went on to suggest I had a pattern of erratic behavior and hinted at questions about my mental state. Robert had painted himself and Margaret as helpless victims of a cruel old man who snapped without reason. No mention of the Christmas snub, no hint of Claire's demands or their years of financial bleeding. Just me, the villain, abandoning poor elderly visitors in a blizzard that existed only in Robert's imagination. I set my coffee down and read the piece again. Then a third time. The byline belonged to Patricia Morrison, lifestyle editor. I didn't recognize the name, but I knew the play. Robert had cashed in his favors, pulled strings through his banking contacts, and placed this story right where it would do the most damage. It was smart, very smart. For the first time since this mess began, I felt a grudging respect for my adversaries. They weren't just spoiled, entitled leeches throwing tantrums. They were calculated, deliberate. They understood that in a small city like Spokane, your reputation was your currency, and one well-placed article could bankrupt you overnight. They'd declared war. I folded the newspaper with care and set it aside. My mind shifted into the same slow, methodical gear that had built my business from nothing. This was no longer about an airport pickup. This wasn't about Christmas dinner or mortgage payments. This was about winning. I opened my laptop and started typing names into search bars. Robert Whitmore, Margaret Whitmore, Claire Reynolds. Their social media profiles, their connections, their routines, their weaknesses, everything they'd foolishly left public over the years. If they wanted to play chess, I'd show them what a grandmaster looked like. I glanced at my wall calendar. December 18th, 7 days until Christmas. 7 days to plan something they wouldn't forget. The next 3 days, I lived in a different reality. Not the one where I was Frank Bennett, the worn-out old man who let his family bleed him dry. This was the world where I was Frank Bennett, the businessman, the strategist, the man who had built something from the ground up and wasn't about to let a handful of entitled leeches dismantle what I'd spent 4 decades creating. My laptop became my war room. Browser tabs lined the screen like cards in a high-stakes poker game. Robert Whitmore, retired First National Bank manager, member of the Spokane Country Club, treasurer of the Inland Northwest Business Leaders Association. A man with a long career in trust and influence and a lot to lose. Margaret's Instagram was a curated highlight reel of refined living charity luncheons, wine tastings, weekend getaways to Coeur d'Alene, tagged with captions like #blessedlife. Every post polished to project class and success. Comments rolled in from friends praising her impeccable taste and inspirational lifestyle, all of it propped up by other people's money, mine included. Claire's Facebook told the real story. Photos of our beautiful home showcasing the kitchen I'd paid for. Check-ins at high-end restaurants during the very months I was covering their utility bills. A smug status update from last week. So excited for Christmas dinner with family. Can't wait to show off our hosting skills. Our hosting skills, our home, our success. The narcissism was staggering. But it was David's LinkedIn activity that handed me the last puzzle piece. A fresh connection, Patricia Morrison, lifestyle editor at the Spokane Review. The same Patricia Morrison who'd authored the hit piece on me. I leaned back, scanning the digital evidence spread across my screen. They'd made 3 fatal mistakes. First, they'd underestimated me. Second, they'd taken their attack public, which meant I could do the same. Third, they'd documented their entire privileged lifestyle online, gift wrapping a case of their hypocrisy for me. I clicked over to Patricia Morrison's profile. 43 years old, journalism degree from WSU, 15 years in local news, 0 history in banking or finance. That meant Robert had approached her cold, likely through someone in his business circle. A quick scan through the local business directory confirmed my hunch. 3 mutual connections between Robert and Patricia's editor. This article hadn't been random. It had been planted deliberately, methodically. Amateur hour. I opened a fresh document, not to pen a rebuttal, but something sharper, a timeline. 5 years of financial support backed by hard evidence, bank statements, receipts, canceled checks. The $47,000 down payment from my home equity loan. The $18,000 kitchen upgrade when Claire decided granite countertops were essential. 60 monthly mortgage payments of $168,000. Added up, and you're staring at $250,000 more than I'd spent on myself in the last decade. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Probably Claire testing a new approach. I ignored it and kept working. By evening, the manila folder was stuffed thick enough to choke a horse. Inside, bank statements, receipts, social media photos flaunting purchases I'd funded, and a printed copy of the review article covered in my handwritten notes dissecting each lie. I glanced at my wall calendar. December 24th was circled in red, not for Christmas, but because it was the ideal day for a reckoning. According to Claire's Facebook events, they were hosting Christmas dinner for 12 family friends, neighbors, the very social circle who read the Spokane Review and formed their opinions from it. Exactly the kind of audience who deserved to hear the truth. I shut my laptop and headed to the kitchen, where my old Nikon sat gathering dust, a purchase I'd made years ago for documenting construction projects. Tonight, it had a new purpose, evidence collection. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. Tomorrow, Robert Whitmore and his crew were going to learn what happens when you pick a fight with someone who actually knows how to win. Christmas Eve morning came in gray and cold, the kind of Spokane winter day that made you grateful for warmth and family. 2 things I wouldn't be getting from mine. I had other business. I spread my files across the table like an attorney prepping for court. Bank statements stacked by year, each payment highlighted. Receipts in neat order, mapping out 5 years of me bankrolling their comfortable lives. Printed screenshots from their social media. Claire's shiny new jewelry photos from their lake getaway. The lavish holiday decor currently sparkling on their front lawn. Every bit of it funded by me. I'd made 12 identical packets, one for every seat at their dinner table. On top of each stack sat the Spokane Review article, my red ink comments glaring in the margins. Lie was written next to Robert's dramatic claim about dangerous winter weather. False. His comments about my erratic behavior were underlined with notes pointing to what he conveniently left out: 5 years of steady financial support. I put on my navy suit, the same one I'd worn to Linda's funeral. It was pressed and sharp, but this time I wasn't mourning. I was burying the man who let himself be walked on. Tonight I'd stand as someone who demanded respect. At 6:30 p.m., I loaded my briefcase with the evidence and drove to Kendall Yards. Their house glowed warm in the dark, the driveway jammed with cars, the street lined on both sides. Through the front windows, I could see silhouettes moving in the dining room. Claire playing hostess in the home my money had helped pay for. I parked across the street and checked my watch. 6:45. Perfect. They'd be mid-meal, no easy exit for anyone. The front door was unlocked, of course. Claire liked to brag about how safe her neighborhood was, unlike the rougher areas. I stepped inside quietly. The warmth and hum of laughter hit me at once. From the dining room came Margaret's voice. "But darling, that's not how we do things in our family." Followed by more laughter. Our family. After all they'd done to shove me out of it. I walked into the dining room, briefcase in hand. 12 faces turned toward me, shock, discomfort, and in Robert and Margaret's eyes, something close to panic. Claire froze mid-sip of her wine. David's face drained of color. Robert and Margaret looked like they'd seen a ghost. "Good evening, everyone," I said evenly, placing my briefcase on their marble sideboard. "I hope you don't mind me joining your Christmas celebration." Claire found her voice first. "Frank, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave immediately." "Actually," I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out the first packet, "I think your guests deserve to know who really paid for this dinner, this house, and the lifestyle you've been showing off." A woman I didn't know, probably one of Margaret's charity friends, leaned forward. "What is he talking about, Claire? He's having some kind of episode," Claire said quickly. "David, call someone." But I was already moving around the table, setting a packet in front of each guest. "Here are the bank records," I said conversationally. 5 years of mortgage payments, $168,000, plus the down payment, renovations, furniture, appliances. Everything you're looking at right now. The only sound in the room was paper rustling as 12 sets of eyes scanned the numbers and dates. I watched expressions shift from polite confusion to disbelief. "This is..." one man began before trailing off. "Outrageous," a woman across from him finished. "Claire, why didn't you tell us any of this?" Claire's perfect mask was starting to slip. "It's more complicated than it looks. Frank volunteered to help us. We never asked." Actually, I cut in, pulling the folded review article from my briefcase. "Let's talk about what you did ask for and what you told the press about me." The air seemed to drop 10 degrees. I placed copies of the article in front of them, letting the guests connect my face to the one they'd seen in the paper 3 days ago. "Now," I said, my voice steady and clear, "let's discuss the real manipulators in this family." Robert's color drained from red to a sickly gray. Margaret sat stiff in her chair, her wineglass forgotten in her hand. "Mr. Whitmore here," I said, tapping the review with my finger, "used his old banking connections to make sure this story got planted. Take a look. Notice how I'm painted as unstable, reckless, and heartless enough to abandon helpless seniors in freezing conditions." A gray-haired man in an expensive cashmere sweater looked up from the article. "Robert, what is this about?" "The weather was 52 degrees and sunny," I answered before Robert could speak. "And they weren't some poor stranded tourists. They were Claire's parents flying in for a Christmas dinner I'd been barred from, because apparently I wasn't good enough to be in their company." Margaret finally spoke. "That's not..." "We never said." "You never said what, Margaret?" I asked, pulling out my phone and scrolling to screenshots of Claire's social media posts. "That I was too low class for your parents, that my home cooking and so-called blue-collar conversation would embarrass you in front of your refined friends." One of Margaret's charity club friends shifted in her chair, avoiding eye contact. "Margaret, surely you didn't..." "He's twisting everything," Robert cut in, but the confidence in his voice was gone. "This man has serious mental health issues, stress from getting older. Financial problems? Financial problems?" I nearly laughed. "Robert, I've been funneling almost $3,000 a month to your daughter and her husband for 5 years. The only financial problems here are the ones about to land on you." I turned toward the table, making sure I had every eye on me. "These people have taken over $200,000 from me while bad-mouthing me behind my back. They've turned my own son against me, kept me out of family gatherings, and when I finally set a boundary, they tried to annihilate my reputation in print." David finally spoke, his voice quiet. Dad, I didn't know about the article. Your wife knew I told him evenly, and her parents orchestrated it. They made me the villain because I refused to keep being their personal ATM and chauffeur. I could feel the mood in the room shifting, like the floor itself had tilted. Guests were looking at the Whitmores differently now, with dawning recognition of just how much of tonight's charm was smoke and mirrors. "This is unconscionable," said an older woman in pearls, staring down at the bank statements. "Robert, how could you allow your daughter to take advantage of this man's generosity, then smear him publicly when he stopped?" Robert's polished facade cracked. "You don't understand the full picture. I understand it perfectly." The woman cut him off. "This man has been propping up your family financially while you treated him like hired help. And when he finally said no, you tried to burn his good name." Margaret's voice came out thin and strained. "He left us stranded at the airport after you told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner because my presence might embarrass your parents," I replied calmly. "After 5 years of paying their bills, while you looked down your nose at me for my heritage and my education." The silence was suffocating now. 12 people staring at Robert and Margaret, their faces a mix of disgust and embarrassment for having called them friends. Claire made one last attempt to regain control. "Everyone, please. This is a private family matter that's gotten out of hand." "No," I said sharply. "This stopped being a family matter the moment you made it public. When you used the press to take a sledgehammer to my character. When you decided my reputation was disposable if it protected your pride." I looked around at the unfamiliar faces, people who now knew exactly who I was and what I'd done for this so-called family. I wanted you all to hear the truth before you read about Frank Bennett in the paper again, because you will read about me again. But next time it'll be the real story. I closed my briefcase and straightened my tie. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner. It's the last one I'll ever pay for." As I walked to the door, the voices behind me rose. Accusations, pointed questions, the sound of a social empire collapsing in real time. It was without a doubt the sweetest Christmas music I'd ever heard. The letter showed up on a Tuesday morning in March, sent by certified mail, each word inside carrying the weight of looming legal trouble. I signed for it at the door, noting how the early spring air carried the scent of fresh grass and possibility so different from the heavy, joyless cold that had defined that last December. Notice of default, final demand for payment. 3 months of missed mortgage payments had finally caught up with David and Claire, like a riptide pulling them under. $400 past due with 14 days to pay up or face foreclosure on the very house I'd once helped them secure. I set the envelope aside and went back to my coffee, reading the notice the way you'd scan a news blurb about some far-off thunderstorm, mildly interesting, but no longer my problem. My phone had been lighting up for weeks with increasingly frantic calls. Claire's number went on my blocked list after her first tear-filled voicemail. Robert and Margaret Whitmore, once the toast of Spokane's social set, had vanished from that scene completely after their humiliating Christmas dinner fallout. Even David had been trying to reach me. I'd ignored him out of equal parts anger and curiosity, wondering how long it would take before pride gave way to desperation. The answer was 97 days. He showed up at my door that Thursday evening, looking like life had stripped a decade off him in just 3 months. The sharp, confident man who'd once shut me out of his table was gone. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion. His expensive suit was rumpled, and he wore the scent of defeat like a second skin. "Dad," he said as soon as I opened the door, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, letting him in. His eyes roamed my living room, new furniture bought with my first mortgage-free paycheck, walls freshly painted after 8 stagnant years. Small repairs I could finally afford once I stopped underwriting someone else's dream. "Nice place," he said quietly. "It's what happens," I replied. "Settling into my new recliner when you spend money on yourself instead of people who don't appreciate it." He sat gingerly on the edge of my couch, as if the cushions might reject him. "Dad, I need you to know how sorry I am. About Christmas dinner, the newspaper article, the way we treated you?" "Go on," I said evenly. "I didn't know Robert planted that article. I swear I didn't. And when I found out..." He raked his hands through his hair. "God, Dad, the things they said about you behind your back. About our family. About Mom." My jaw tightened at the mention of Linda, but I kept my tone calm. "And what exactly did they say about your mother? That she knew her place better than you? That she understood boundaries?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "I should have defended you. I should have stood up to them years ago." "Yes," I said simply. "You should have." Silence stretched between us, heavy with 5 years of bad choices. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower buzzed a normal sound from a normal street where sons didn't exile their fathers on Christmas. "The house is in foreclosure," David said finally. "I know. We can't make the payments without..." He stopped short, realizing exactly what he was about to admit. "Without my help," I finished. "Without the money I was sending every month, while you let your wife's family treat me like I was beneath them." I leaned forward. "Do you know how much I gave you in those 5 years?" He nodded miserably. "Claire added it up after Christmas. The mortgage, the down payment, all of it. Over 200,000. 237,468 out," I corrected. "I know the exact number because I finally did something I should have done a long time ago. I added it up." His face collapsed under the weight of the number. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it, son. That money's gone. But worse than that, the years are gone. 5 years I could have spent building a relationship with you instead of paying for your wife's curated fantasy life." "I know," he said. "But maybe we could start over." There was a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Maybe there's a way to..." "Are you asking me to start covering the mortgage again?" The light in his eyes died. "We're going to lose everything, Dad. The house Claire's respect her parents' approval. I don't know what I'll do." "You'll figure it out," I said, not unkindly. "The same way I figured out how to live without a son who respected me. The same way I learned to spend Christmas alone while you celebrated with people who thought I wasn't worth a seat at the table." His shoulders shook as he cried quietly, the tears of a man with no more place to run. "I lost you, didn't I? I chose them over you, and now you're gone forever." I studied him. The man I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for who'd let others convince him his father wasn't good enough. "David," I said finally, "you didn't lose me. You gave me away. There's a difference." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Is there any chance, any way you could forgive me? I forgave you months ago," I said, and meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to how things were. It doesn't mean pretending it never happened, or that I'm going to bankroll a lifestyle where my presence is a liability. "What does that mean then?" he asked. I stood and walked to the mantel where Linda's framed photo rested beside a newer one, me, with Angela and her family at Easter dinner. The first holiday in years where I'd been surrounded by people who genuinely wanted me there. "It means," I said, "that if you want a relationship with me, you're going to have to build it from the ground up. It means showing me respect without expecting me to earn it first. It means making decisions based on what's right, not just what's easy." I turned and met his eyes. "And it means that the next time someone, your wife, her parents, anybody tries to shut me out of a family gathering, you'll remember who's actually been acting like family." David nodded slowly, and for the first time I saw him grasp the idea that respect isn't automatic. You have to give it to get it. "The house," he asked quietly, "isn't your problem anymore." I sat back down, feeling lighter than I had in years. You're a grown man, David. Handle it like one. Get a job that covers your bills. Sell the place and buy something you can actually afford. Stop living beyond your means and counting on someone else to pick up the slack. He rose to his feet, standing straighter than when he'd first walked in. You're right about all of it. I know. He started for the door, then turned back. Dad, for what it's worth, seeing you stand up for yourself at Christmas dinner. I was proud of you. Embarrassed and angry, yeah, but proud too. Good, I said. Maybe there's hope for you yet. After he left, I poured myself a glass of the good whiskey and stepped out onto the back porch. Spring was just beginning in Spokane. Trees were budding, the air warming with a quiet promise. In 4 months, I'd turned 63. Linda had been gone 8 years. I'd wasted 5 of those years letting people walk all over me in the name of family. I wasn't going to waste another minute. My phone buzzed a text from Angela. Dinner Sunday. The kids want to show you their school projects. I smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Real family, I'd learned, was made of people who actually wanted you there. Everything else was just overpriced theater, and I was done buying tickets to shows where I wasn't welcome on stage. The whiskey went down smooth, tasting like freedom, and the future looked exactly as bright as I was ready to make it.